In April 2023, I had the honor of interviewing Mike, one of my former tinnitus patients who, following a period of severe distress, went on to attain full habituation. As you'll hear in his story, Mike was a typical tinnitus sufferer. But Mike is also unique in that he's the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. Mike's story shows us how tinnitus knows no bounds. Anyone can become hijacked, and anyone can find freedom through my mindfulness and acceptance-based CBT program. Let's hear Mike tell his story.
Can you start, Mike, by describing a little bit what your tinnitus is like? What are you hearing?
Yeah. The noise, I think when I first realized that it was probably, and it probably hasn't changed much in terms of what the noise like. It's a higher pitched noise for me, and I would call it a moderate in terms of volume. It was never this overwhelming thing in volume. I think probably the biggest issue around maybe the volume per se was the awareness level that suddenly this noise appeared that wasn't there before. So if you said kind of, that was kind of then, and if I were to, look at it now, the noise itself hasn't changed, this kind of higher pitched noise. And, I say, we've gotten through the process and I feel really good about where I am and that relative to the stages, but the volume itself probably hasn't changed. What I think has changed is, one, I'm adapting to it and getting, I'm used to it. And my perception of it has changed, right? It's changed from something that is, I know this whole fight or flight kind of thing, right? It's something that was, I didn't know what to do with, or how am I going to handle this and all that, to something that, okay, it's there. I can just, if I hear it, I can make it just kind of go away. I change the mindset piece around it. So if I'm being honest, I think that the noise itself is the same and the volume's probably there. It's just kind of the mental ability to handle it all.
Okay. What was your mental state, would you say, when you first reached out to me? And we should clarify for people that this was almost 2 years ago. It's been, we're about 2 months away from your two-year anniversary.
Right.
Or when you and I met, I think a month away from your anniversary of onset.
Yeah, onset would have been when I first really kind of noticed it was around Easter time, of 21. That was kind of my memory of being really kind of hitting, I guess, a low point there. From a mental standpoint, that arguably was the lowest point in my lifetime in terms of that I've ever experienced. I've never experienced anything like it, and it was the noise and being able to cope with it. And initially I wasn't able to cope with it. And it was very, very difficult. I look back on it and kind of wonder how I was able to get through it. And I don't wonder anymore. I know how I got through it. We can talk about that. But at the time it seemed insurmountable. That's probably the word. And I couldn't, you couldn't see the trees through the forest. This was all consuming. The level of anxiety, the level of stress was beyond what I've ever experienced. And you obviously, I'm in my 60s, and you've had a number of things that you've had probably experienced during your lifetime, but that clearly is something I've never had before. And I didn't know how I was gonna, really think about, let alone the next week or month. It was making it to the next day and next couple of days. And I lost 12 pounds, and of which weight I didn't need to lose. And I just, the stress and anxiety, I wasn't hungry. I was basically forcing myself to eat. I knew I needed to eat some food, but still not eating at a levels that I was. It was difficult to work out. And I'm somebody that works out probably a good solid 6, sometimes 7 days a week. And I've had, I've had setbacks in my life before, whether it's in the career or physical, but it's always something where you worked harder, you work smarter, time might resolve if you had, an injury or surgery or something, and you're able to kind of get through some of this stuff. This was, I was at a point from a mental standpoint, I didn't know how to resolve it. And that was probably as frustrating as anything. And was I going to be able to resolve it?
Mm-hmm.
So, and dealing with this, such a mental setback was, as I said before, is something I never had before, never experienced it before. And you might have maybe periods, and I mean periods, just short bursts of whatever, maybe of some depression. I never had what I would call any extended length of any kind of depression, but this was, this certainly, put me in a different realm than I've ever experienced.
Would you endorse the phrase emotional crisis?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And my wife, I don't think she knew what to deal with it. And I think, because she's looking at you, how can I help? And not knowing what to do or where to go. And, you're at a point where you don't know what to do. And so, and I was never one to just look to, call it modern medicine with taking drugs or any of that stuff. It just, to me, that was not the way to go. Not to say that it couldn't be helpful, during the process.
Mm-hmm.
But I was not one to kind of, take an antidepressant or do some other things. For me, there had to be a different way to resolve this.
Mm-hmm. And had you tried anything before we met?
Yeah, I mean, a few things, because I started looking it up and I started to realize probably what it was. And I did what I'd call some sound therapy, where you were listening to some, music, whether it was softer music, or trying to focus on relaxing, calming myself down. And, maybe some relaxation techniques, maybe some breathing, a few things like that. But not to the extent, that was apparent that I needed to do or tight relative to what you had in the program that in the training that we went through together. So it was minimally helpful, I would say. It was not really kind of where I was at. I needed something more involved. I needed something more, I don't know if aggressive is the right word. But and I think, maybe something I haven't looked at was a process. It's the type of person I am. Okay, if I can kind of have a process, whatever that might be, to work myself through a particular issue. So even my wife said this seemed like a good opportunity. When this program came, with you and I working together, this might be more helpful.
I know it's been a couple of years, but what's your memory about what helped about this? What was different about this? So you say, you had a process, but was there anything in particular that stood out?
Yeah, to me, I think there's, a couple of things that, from a programmable standpoint, I think one was understanding what you were going through was normal. And I know you and I are working together that it's not physically harmful, right? That there is a path, a clear, a path, and it's going to be hard work, which it was. I don't want to, you look at a couple of years, right, to get to the point where I'm at today. It wasn't, wasn't like it happened overnight. Now there was in relative terms, some things happened fairly quickly. But the program definitely needed that, and I needed that. And I think the understanding of habituation, right? How long does this take? And I guess it was probably sobering at the start to say that this could possibly take 18 months to 2 years, right? That at that point in time, when you're in that kind of stress and point, that's like, holy mackerel, am I going to be able to, again, I said I'm worried about getting to the next day, and how do I get to the,
right.
there? But I think the understanding that the timeline, the stages of habituation were probably were helpful in some ways, but I think the program once I got started, and it was hard, right? It was definitely hard. I think for me, the biggest thing then too was the mindfulness training. That to me was really what tipped the scale. I mean, it was having an understanding in our meetings back and forth, and tips and how to approach different things were extremely valuable. That individual mindfulness training, and I know the tapes that you had set out were critical. That is, focused on that, and I did that, and I focused on it for minimum of 2. I would say sometimes 3 and 4 times a day. I'd say early on it was 3 and 4, and then kind of maybe went down to 2, and then you might go to 1, and then sometimes as you worked your way down on times, in terms of how many times you did it a day, but the time frame that you did the training also went up, right? It was kind of take bite-sized increments at a time, work your way to a point. But the mindfulness training, and then also, the breathing, to me was really important, because I did some things on breathing, but not the technique. I think I needed to have a better understanding of the technique. That was helpful. And then,
excuse me, but I just want to clarify one thing, because when people hear you say mindfulness, I just want to clarify, we're not talking about a Headspace app or something like that. This is a very tailored mindfulness exercise, mindfulness of sound to help with tinnitus.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yep. The program. I mean, and that piece, was, you kind of calm yourself down, you do a breathing exercise, you go through a point where you're listening to, you're thinking of positive things, you're thinking of, then also, as you go through your breathing, you're also then going to start to listen to your tinnitus. You're going to listen to external noises, and then you kind of bring it all together. And again, it's this melding of the sound that comes together over time, where it blends together and just really eventually becomes one, for lack of a better term. And that was the piece for me. And the hard part, and I remember this is, when you talk about, you get to the point where you sit and listen to your tinnitus with earplugs in, with no external noise, just to listen to it. And that took, a little bit of time, but it forces you to listen to it. It forces you to understand it, to accept it.
Listen to it mindfully. Right. That's
correct. Right.
The 2 ways to hear it. One is like this, and the other is,
right.
Okay, it's all right. It's just a sound, non-judgmental,
correct.
In the present moment, not getting pulled into all the thoughts and judgments about it.
Yeah. And, it's your, I think we talked early on, I'm more of a type A personality, and, some of this fight or flight, and, you really want to fight. That was me initially, to fight it, and that's really not the way to resolve this. And I think you've got to, now you can turn that energy and that turn that energy into something that helps you get through it, right? And I think that's what the process really helped.
Well said. Yeah. And by the way, so I have your scores here, your tinnitus distress scale scores, and within I do say it can take 18 months, a couple of years to fully habituate it, fully move through those stages to the point where you're just pretty much oblivious to it, like I've been for 17 years now. But you do see a pretty significant drop in distress and attention to tinnitus over the first couple of months or so. So I have here about almost exactly 3 months into the program, your distress scale dropped from a score from a 62 to a 23, which is super significant. And you moved from stage 1.5 up to stage 2.75. So that's significant improvement within the first few months, reduction in distress and attention to tinnitus.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was there's two parts to that. Obviously I was very pleased with the the ability to get that level of change, fairly, and again, in relative terms, I guess people, you may not think about it, and at the very start, even 3 months might seem like a lot, and it is. But as I look back, thank goodness we were able to kind of get that drop. And what I would say is, I did see impacts, not necessarily on a daily basis, but a weekly basis. If you go, okay, if I was honest with myself, each week was probably a little better, but it kept getting better. And the more you stuck to the program, the more you worked at it. And it was hard work. Believe me, it was very hard work to do meditating. That was not that's not me. So now I'm kind of, meditate. I had to kind of flip that and kind of, in some ways, force myself to do it, just kind of calm down type. I'm always on the go, and was something that I didn't do. And it's hard both personally and and professionally, and to kind of work my way through this. I would take the time at work, obviously take the time at home. I was taking 1 to 2 walks a day to try to get myself out, practice breathing, and get outside. And it was hard in a personal environment, going out to dinner, doing social environments. There were a couple times where I left a dinner, or we went over a friend's house and ended up leaving because I just wasn't able to kind of cope with it all. Again, that was kind of the early stages, but that's all gone, right? I mean, really, there's no social, term, both professional, personal, and social environments where I'm inhibited in any way, to the point where I really just don't think about it. So
talk a little bit about how you're doing now, like what the difference is.
Well, the difference is, obviously it's night and day. I think, there's really at times where, I would say arguably, like the way I look at it is 90+% of the time, I don't even really think about it at all. If it does come up, where something reminds me of it, or I suddenly hear it, or somebody might ask me a question about it because they're aware of my situation, before, how you're doing. And I'm okay with that. I can talk about it. I can think about it. But I think the whole kind of positive thinking, or changing your attention in terms of what you're focusing on, if it does come up, or I find myself focusing on it, I can immediately say, move off of that and then focus on something different, and get off of that. And I can do that quickly, in a matter of, what I call seconds, which is helpful. I mean, probably the time that I would say, if I were to notice it the most, and I mentioned some of those things, is if I go home and it's a quiet, and I walk in the door and there's nobody in the house, my wife's out of town or whatever, and it's just real quiet, I might suddenly notice it. Where you're at work, you walk in, you immediately, you're doing email, you're in meetings, you're in this, and your mind's off. You don't even think. I don't even think about it, to be honest with you, at work. It doesn't even come up, arguably. I might say 90+, I don't even think about it. At work, it's less than 5% of the time that it might even come up. And again, the ability, that mindfulness training, as well as some of the techniques that we've talked about, has helped me kind of just move off it. It's that move to a more positive thought, or a different thought. And that takes time too, right? To kind of just stop, right? So change directions. Yeah, and the sound enrichment, I think, was helpful as well, as a separate item. I mean, to be honest, probably the biggest struggle too in the beginning, and I think it can perpetuate itself, right? Because you get in this downward spiral, is not sleeping. And that was probably my, in addition to some of the other things, was causing some of the bigger issues, right? Because you're constantly, if you don't sleep, it's just, I was probably only getting an hour or 2 a night, right, for a couple of weeks in a row. You can't function that way, right? You just can't. And it kind of feels like you start to spiral, right? And you can't figure it out. It was, that part was very, very difficult. And then things got better towards the sleeping, and I was using, sound enrichment. It might be a fan. For me, a background noise of a fan worked. I had one at home. I had one
Mm.
at work by my desk, and then I would travel with one. And eventually, and just to show you where it was, I had initially 2 fans at home.
This is a
then
common
eventually
story.
my goal was, yeah, how do I get, all right, my goal is to get to 1 fan, or it might be 2 fans, then to kind of go from high to medium. Then I got to get myself to 1 fan, work your way down all the way to the point where I don't use any sound at all to go to sleep.
Right.
None.
Yeah.
And if I wake up in the middle of the night, sometimes I might hear it, but I can, again, I use the mindfulness training to again, push off the thinking and focus on something else.
Right.
But it is not impacting my sleep.
Mm-hmm.
I got over the sleep piece, started to be better at sleep, because once I was asleep, I could stay asleep. But, and then I struggled a little bit maybe with if I would wake up in, kind of the earlier stages of it. But the thing that probably then impacted me was not, I like to take a nap, right? Every now and then, obviously not during the day I'm working, but, sometimes on a weekend, and I struggled to do that. And then eventually, again, as the training, was kicking in and I was doing all the things I needed to be doing, that now has got to a point where, again, it's a non-issue anymore. So whether it's, the level and depth and quality of sleep is fine. There's really no social issue, social interaction issues, whether it's friends and family. And actually, as you and I talked about our last session, I actually went to a Bruce Springsteen concert, so was okay with doing that. So I did wear earplugs
with the right hearing protection. Let's make sure people
with the right hearing protection. But but the
So,
would I have even thought about that 2 years ago? The answer is no.
Right. So it sounds like you really feel like yourself again. You're fully behaving like yourself again. Tinnitus is not interfering with any aspect of your life, except you're more careful with your hearing protection when you do go to a Springs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even to the point of hearing protection, like I wear if I go out and use a blower or whatever in the yard, to whatever I put on hearing protection at that point, right?
That's it.
So
Yeah.
you never, at this point, I just don't take any chances. So but where I'm at, and even along the way, what I kept doing is I kept asking. I had a confidant at work, and as well as obviously my wife at home, and would ask along the way, how am I doing, right? How am I interacting? Is there any kind of visible signs of? And clearly, initially there was, but it was interesting. I think when I got to that, arguably that beyond with the kind of the a couple of weeks, I saw some, I could sense some changes, and we just talked about it. About the 3-month mark, there was a noticeable change, and then I would say there was probably a significant impact at the 6-month mark. And I would say, I think it's good to get feedback from people you trust to see how you're doing, so that whether to me I'm good at self-assessing, but it's also good to make sure you're on target, or what you think you're doing is actually what you're doing. So work was actually going fine. There was really, people didn't see the impact, even though I might have still had, that 6-month mark or the 3-month mark, things dramatically improved at that point. And people knew. I let people know what I was going through so that people understood it. And I didn't want to talk about it a lot, but people understood it, and were obviously very, understanding, and how could they help or whatever. But and people, to me, the biggest help other people can give is a level of understanding, because the reality is the hard work's got to be with you, right? I mean, and that's tough. And even to say we're at a 6-month mark where it felt dramatically better, to think about we're almost at 2 years, and on that scale, there's a long tail, right? There's a long tail to get to that point. And I can remember many of our meetings having the discussion, or again, you reminded me, it's a long tail. You make pretty significant increases calling in that first 6 months. And then it's, slow progress thereafter. You can't give up. You have to keep doing the program, doing the process. And gradually, some of the things you can start to do without. For example, I don't need any of the sound therapy anymore. I don't.
At what point would you say you fully tapered off that?
That's a good question. I have to kind of think back because, for example, I've not used a fan for sleeping in forever that I can remember. And to me, that was my. Yeah, it's been a long time. But at work, what it was helpful because my level of concentration was tough, right? So the music actually on a very low, and I know the type of forget what you would call them, the type of headphones that
the bone conduction headphones. Yeah,
correct.
Yeah,
but really, I think those were versus the in-ear one. They were hard, so you could still hear some external noises, yet you had some soothing music to help. That helped my concentration at work tremendously. That was honestly a lifesaver as well, to make sure I could do my job effectively. And I'm running a multi-billion-dollar business, so this is not, I don't take this thing lightly in terms of what we were trying to do and what I needed to get done at work.
Right.
We
should say that you have a very important role in this company. You're leading one of the larger companies in the world. And so that's important for people to understand that, to your credit, Mike, you went through this emotional crisis at the helm of this company and you kept it going. And that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And did all of this work we did together and kept things going.
Yeah. Well, I said, I appreciate, my wife was able to, because at the time I was looking for stuff and she found it, and I looked at the program, and everything kind of I tried, and that's when I reached out. And, I have to admit, I was grateful when we were able to, get the first appointment and kind of get going. And again, you don't know, but I know I sent you a note shortly thereafter, probably the end of last year, and I don't know, honestly, I don't know where I would have been without the program.
Well, thank you. And what would you tell people who are currently struggling with tinnitus? What would be your best encouragement for them?
Yeah, listen, I've been there. I know what it's like. It's not easy. And, I told you, I normally don't do these types of things, but I said, if I can help somebody else, I said, this might help, right?
Yeah, I'm feeling it too. Well,
I get a little talking about it because I know what it was like.
I got you.
I know what everyone's going through.
Yeah.
And here's the deal. I think that if you go through the process, work hard at it, you'll get to where you want to be. And I am. That's where I'm at. I said, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Try not to do this.
No,
keep my act together, but
the sincerity is going to be felt. And
I've been there. I know what you're going through. I know what people are going through. I didn't know how I was going to get through. I said the next day. I'm not a religious zealot, but I am somewhat religious. I remember going, saying prayers and doing the things I might need to do, and that's all maybe part of it. If someone believes that they don't, that's fine too. That's not necessary. But clearly, the program, it takes time, it takes hard work, but you can get to a point in your life where tinnitus does not control you. And I remember kind of my kind of the recovery statement a little bit was, I'm not going to let tinnitus control my life. I'm not going to let that happen. And I kept saying that to myself as I would go through, several times a day. And I'm going to get to a point, where, well, I'll get over this. I mean, I'm just going to work hard, and we're going to get through it. And I have. And, to say that it's completely gone, the answer is no. And I think there's times where you recognize it, but does it at a point, and there's maybe a point in time where you think, in all honesty, is that do you wish it wasn't there? And the answer is, yeah, of course you do. Right. But of course I do. But I move off of it. Again, like I said, I can't control, I'm not going to let it control me. I'm going to control it, and we're going to move on, and I'm going to live my life the way I want to live my life, and do my job to the best of my ability. And I think I'm at a spot in both situations where it's not an issue.
Great. Well, for me, so it's been a couple of years for you. For me, it's been 17 years, 19 from the start of my tinnitus. And to this day, I'm grateful and get teary, and in that gratitude and transformation that occurred. So thank you so much for meeting with me and reviewing this really, really challenging time in your life, and sharing that to give some hope and inspiration to other people. Thank you, Mike.
If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We've got lots more videos like this to help you free yourself from tinnitus and get fully back into your life.